The problem is, Kwajo, how can you not do it at a local level? You can't have the man from Whitehall determining sort of where a housing estate should go, can you? Or woman from Whitehall.
Yeah, I get that point, but I think we have a huge problem in this country with NIMBYism, and a few years ago I didn't even know what that term meant. I've sort of learned on the job. And it is becoming a huge sort of barrier block to actually building more homes in this country. I think we have to realise as a country, we are almost, I'd say we're in dire straits at the moment. We've got, like I mentioned, 1.4 million people waiting to get into social homes. Renting prices, private rented prices through the absolute roof. We need homes for the growing population, and we need places to build them. But if everyone's turning around and saying, no, we don't want it in our not in our backyard sort of thing, it's going to be an eyesore, it's going to destroy our towns, it's going to destroy our cities, then we're never going to make progress. There has to be, I think, a balance. And I think government are going to have to get to a point where they put their foot down and say, look, we need more homes, because ultimately there's people going homeless. There are people without a roof over their head.
Well, the village I grew up in, the school roll in the primary school that I went to, when I was there, was 105. It's now under 60. Now, that school is going to close soon unless new young families move into the village. But the parish council doesn't want any new houses at all for exactly the reasons that Rupert has said. And, I mean, I think that's just a crying shame, because whether you live in a small village in a rural area or whether you live in a city, your local area needs to be constantly revived, if that's the right word. And you only do that by new people coming in from time to time. And it's just not happening in so many places up and down the country.
I think people worry that when they talk about building homes, right, in their towns and in their cities, bulldozers are just going to roll through and destroy the way their towns and cities looks, when that's not the case. I mean, homes can be built and integrated into towns and cities to look like they were always there, sort of thing. And that's, I think, what we have to, the way in which we have to do it. But the ultimate, I think the bottom line for me, right, is who am I going to, and I might sound harsh saying this, but who am I really going to listen to and prioritise? Someone that's homeless and doesn't have a roof over their head and the need to have a roof over their head, or someone that doesn't want a home built because they think it's going to be an eyesore. I know who I'm going to prioritise, and I think that's the route we're going to have to start going down.
Stephen's emailed to say, listening to Kwajo's passion for housing and helping people, I predict he'll get an MBE in the future. I would have thought a CBE at the very least.
I did get nominated last year, but I turned it down.
Oh, no, you didn't.
I did.
Did you?
I did, yeah. I did, and I made the reasons clear as to why. I mean, the reason I shouldn't be having to do this, right? I shouldn't be having to do this campaigning work, and as a result, so many people are suffering. This shouldn't be my job. And the reason I turned it down was I wasn't taking an award while this existing situation was going on, whilst people continue to die in poor conditions in their homes, whilst people continue to be homeless, whilst 1.4 million people are on the current social housing waiting list. I didn't come into this for that. The reason I came into this was to get government to change and really genuinely change things for the people of this country. That's the only goal there. That's the only thing that I care about, and that's the only sort of reward that I want. So yeah,
maybe in the future.
Who knows?
A friend of mine, who I better not name, he had a problem with rats in the attic, and then found out that there was damp all around the walls, and mould had developed, and 2 young children, and this is like in a bungalow in Surrey. Now, his landlord actually was really good and tried to sort it out, but it was clearly so serious that it couldn't be sorted out initially. So instead of keeping my friend to his lease, he just said, well, you cannot live in my property. You just can't. Yeah. I mean, in a good way, not sort of ordering him to go, but actually being quite helpful in the whole process. But I suspect the people that come to see you have landlords that don't take that for you. No, and I mean, that for me is an absolute rare example, but an absolute good example of someone being responsible, right, and prioritising the health and safety of tenants. And far too often,
that's something that doesn't happen, especially in social housing. There's a complete disregard for health and safety. You'd think that they don't really have a duty of care when in fact they do. There's been many occasions where residents that I come across, have doctors and nurses and GPs, head teachers writing in to these providers, and their letters are simply just ignored. Barely, it's probably in many cases not even acknowledged, and that shows, I think, just how much these providers prioritise, I think, the duty of care for their tenants. But of course, that's not me saying every single landlord and private landlord across. It would be wrong for me to do that. Is like that.
You just think, from a human point of view, if you work for one of, whether it's a private sector landlord or a social housing provider, and you're getting these letters in and you just ignore them, I mean, what kind of job satisfaction, what kind of human being are you if you see people in distress and just do nothing to help them?
I mean, their argument perhaps would be the fact that we don't have enough social housing and we don't have anywhere to move them. But still, there's many cases where it's just complete ignorance and a failure to uphold a duty of care for their tenants, and laziness, quite frankly. And it often puts people's lives at risk. What upsets me the most is we're 7 years on from Grenfell, right? And the residents in Grenfell, many of them complained about similar things that residents complain to be about now, and it's 7 years on, and it comes with health and safety too, but still there isn't that priority to prioritise and take seriously the health and safety, put it first and foremost before cutting costs, and it's a real shame. I think it's the biggest shame that we're currently facing.
Now, in 2009, Gordon Brown made a party conference speech, and the headline from it was "British Jobs for British Workers."
He did.
Now, we've got a variation on that now from the Conservatives. In what the Independent is calling a controversial new Tory housing policy, they're seeking to overhaul the housing system, and they're promising British homes for British people. Now, under the new plans, the government is pledging priority housing for people with close connections to the UK and their local area. Applicants who can demonstrate a connection to the UK for at least 10 years and their local area for at least 2 years will be favoured. What's wrong with that?
Well, I mean, this British Homes for British Workers, for me, as soon as I heard it, it was almost, I rolled my eyes when I saw it. And the reason I rolled my eyes was because what it was saying to me was that non-UK nationals are being prioritised for social housing, almost stealing from the plates of UK nationals, when that, for me, is factually incorrect. And the government knew what they were doing with this slogan.
But there is a perception of that, isn't there?
There is.
That sort of British people who've been on the housing ladder for 4 years or 10 years or whatever aren't getting properties, when people who come to this country as asylum seekers or whatever automatically walk into a property.
Yeah,
That's
there is.
the perception.
And that is the perception. It's factually incorrect, but the government know that is the perception. And by putting this slogan out, what they're going to hope and what many people will think is, why should UK nationals not be prioritised about before those coming into the country? The facts are 81% of new social housing goes to white British nationals. 90% goes to, so 90% of social housing goes to UK nationals already. For me, the slogan just suggests that foreigners are being prioritised over UK nationals, when this simply isn't the case. And actually, the Oxford Migration Observatory found migrants are more likely to live in poor quality private rented homes than UK nationals. The problem isn't migrants or foreigners here. The problem is the lack of access to social housing. That isn't the problem of people coming to the UK. That isn't the problem of foreigners. It's generations of underinvestment by consecutive governments, Labour and the Conservatives. And it started for me with the Right to Buy scheme when it was introduced under Margaret Thatcher. I think it's one of the worst policies. I'd even go as far to say the worst policy that any government has introduced in this country in relation to housing. And people on the surface thought it was absolutely great, right? Over 2 million homes were bought under the Right to Buy scheme. Working class individuals got to buy their own homes. But at what expense? We've now got 1.4 million people on the current social housing waiting list. No governments have met their housing targets. There was a promise under the Right to Buy scheme that they were going to replace the homes that they sold off. That never happened. We've got 139,000 homeless kids. The homes that we do have, 1 in 4 don't meet the current decent home standard. And I'd even go further than that. A lot of people won't know, right, that Charlie Goh, who's the son of I want to get this right, Iain Gow, he was the housing minister under Margaret Thatcher when the right to buy... Gow. Yes, Gow. When they introduced the right to buy scheme. In 2013, it was found that he owned 40 or more ex-council properties on a single estate in South London. If that is a successful right to buy scheme, then I don't know, perhaps I'm arguing on the wrong subject,